At 7:30 a.m. on May 8, 1942, Lieutenant J.G. Stanley Vejtasa lifted his SBD Dauntless from the deck of USS Yorktown as radar teams tracked a large Japanese formation approaching from the northwest. Vejtasa, 27 years old and already months in the combat deployments, found himself preparing to intercept fighters in an aircraft never meant for that role. The Dauntless was heavy, slow, and built for vertical attacks on ships, not maneuvering against A-6M0 fighters, which remained the most effective carrier-based combat aircraft in the Pacific. U.S. carriers were stretched thin. The previous day, Yorktown had sent out its strike groups and now had too few Wildcats left to defend the fleet. With only 9 fighters airborne and 9 held back for emergencies, the carrier lacked enough interceptors to confront the incoming Japanese attack. As a last resort, carrier commanders ordered SBD crews to fly low-altitude patrols to disrupt torpedo bombers. The idea had never been tested in combat. 8 Dauntlesses from Scouting Squadron 5 launched for this mission. Vejtasa led one section with orders to intercept any torpedo aircraft threatening the American carriers. No plan existed for what to do if Japanese fighters reached them first. Every measure of performance favored the Zero: speed, climb rate, roll rate, and turning radius. What the SBD did possess was strong construction, armor protection, self-sealing tanks, and heavy .5 caliber guns, advantages that, if used precisely, could cripple an unarmored Zero. Japanese air groups had been preparing for years and operated with high kill ratios across the Pacific. Vejtasa's squadron had already lost aircraft earlier in the Coral Sea operations, and he knew the survival statistics well. Still, the SBD patrol took position between the carriers and the approaching Japanese formation. Just before 11 a.m., Yorktown's radar reported the enemy strike at nearly 70 nautical miles. The U.S. fighters were vectored incorrectly, too low to intercept. This left only the 8 Dauntlesses directly in the path of the attack. Vejtasa saw the incoming mass first, dozens of aircraft descending through clouds, and counted a group of Zeros peeling toward his section. 8 fighters moved to engage his 4 SBDs. The attackers expected an easy kill. Instead, Vejtasa relied on a maneuver seldom used by dive bomber crews, turning sharply into the direction of an incoming fighter. Against a high-speed opponent, this forced an attacker to deal with sudden angular changes and extremely tight firing windows. It was a tactic that disrupted aim and made collisions a real possibility.
During the first series of passes, he executed this maneuver repeatedly, each turn forcing Japanese pilots to break away rather than commit to hazardous attack angles. His rear gunner added suppressive fire, making coordinated attacks difficult. Around them, other SBDs were hit. Half of the patrol was down within minutes. As the fight continued, the limitations of the Zero became obvious. Its light weapons struggled to penetrate the Dauntless's armored cockpit, and its 20mm cannon carried very limited ammunition. Vejtasa, meanwhile, used brief firing opportunities during head-on approaches to bring his 50 caliber guns to bear. In one such moment, he fired a short burst that shattered a Zero's engine, sending it down in flames, his first confirmed kill of the engagement. The first Zero Vejtasa hit dropped almost immediately, rolling inverted before falling away. A second attacker went down the same way, another head-on firing pass, another Japanese pilot who misjudged the Dauntless's firepower. The third engagement nearly ended in a collision. Both aircraft drove toward each other until only a few yards remained, each refusing to yield. At the last instant, both pilots banked aside. The Zero broke apart and descended out of control. By the time that brief clash ended, Vejtasa had destroyed 3 fighters in an aircraft never intended for air combat maneuvering. Despite these kills, the larger Japanese strike group remained intact and was closing on the American carriers. With half of the SBD patrol already lost, Vejtasa turned back toward the fleet. His aircraft was damaged and nearly out of ammunition, yet the torpedo bombers were beginning their attack runs. The Japanese force consisted of Nakajima B-5N, Kate, torpedo aircraft. They flew at very low altitude, using the smooth surface of the Coral Sea to deliver Type 91 torpedoes, an aerial weapon that had inflicted heavy losses on Allied shipping since the start of the war. 14 approached Lexington, and another group went for Yorktown. Flying at around 50 feet, they presented a challenge for anti-aircraft crews and required long, straight runs to release their weapons properly. Vejtasa dived from above to disrupt them, but the Kates were already deep into their approach. Reports later noted that the SBDs could not overhaul the torpedo bombers in time. He fired at several aircraft and saw one Kate take visible damage, but the Japanese formation continued forward. At 11:20 a.m., 2 torpedoes slammed into Lexington's port side, flooding engineering spaces and knocking out boilers. Her crew managed to contain the damage temporarily. Yorktown, maneuvering sharply under Captain Elliot Buckmaster, avoided every torpedo aimed at her.
A larger threat soon followed. While the SBDs were engaging at low level, 33 Aichi D-3A Val dive bombers descended from high altitude toward Yorktown. 7 were shot down by anti-aircraft fire, but the rest pressed the attack. A 500-pound bomb detonated deep inside the ship at 11:27 a.m., killing dozens of crewmen and sparking fires throughout multiple compartments. Vejtasa returned to the carrier around noon. His SBD showed extensive structural damage but remained flyable. The wider battle's outcome slowly became clear. Shokaku, struck by American dive bombers the previous day, suffered heavy flight deck damage and had withdrawn. Her sister ship, Zuikaku, also retired after losing much of her air group. American losses, however, were severe. Although Lexington initially survived her torpedo hits, gasoline vapors spreading through damaged compartments ignited shortly before 1 p.m. A series of explosions followed. By late afternoon, the carrier could no longer be saved. At 5 p.m., Captain Sherman ordered the crew to abandon ship. She sank that evening with more than 200 men. Yorktown survived, but required immediate repair. She would receive only days of work, far less than the months normally needed, before being rushed back into service for the next major confrontation in the Central Pacific. In the aftermath, Vejtasa rejoined the surviving pilots of Scouting Squadron 5. Only 4 of the 8 Dauntlesses from his patrol returned. His performance, however, 3 fighters downed in a dive bomber, spread quickly through the air group. Within days, he was reassigned to fighter duty. Losses in the Pacific had left the Navy in urgent need of combat-tested aviators. By late May 1942, Vejtasa received his transfer orders, joining the growing fighter contingent preparing for the next decisive engagement in the Central Pacific. After his transfer, Vejtasa joined Fighting Squadron 10 at Naval Air Station San Diego. The squadron flew Grumman F-4F Wildcats, the same fighters that had struggled against the Zero throughout the early Pacific campaigns. Its commander, Lieutenant Commander James H. Flatley, Jr., was already recognized as one of the Navy's leading tacticians. He had survived direct engagements with Japanese fighters at Coral Sea and understood that success depended on exploiting the Zero's structural weaknesses rather than trying to match its maneuverability. Flatley emphasized that the Zero's lack of armor, vulnerable fuel system, and poor high-speed handling created opportunities for well-timed slashing attacks. Wildcats could not outturn their opponents, but they could use dives, teamwork, and disciplined energy tactics to survive. His pilots trained to fight in pairs, using coordinated maneuvers to cover blind spots and regain altitude after each attack. The unit adopted the name Grim Reapers. When Vejtasa arrived in June 1942, his reputation as the dauntless pilot who had downed 3 Zeros ensured immediate attention. Flatley valued his combat experience, and Vejtasa soon began shaping the squadron's tactical development. He and other officers reviewed the newly adopted beam defense method, devised by Lieutenant Commander John Thatch, a maneuver that allowed 2 Wildcats to protect each other from a pursuing Zero.
While effective defensively, Vejtasa argued that it rarely produced offensive results. He pushed for more aggressive methods built around altitude, speed, and repeated diving strikes. Flatly accepted these suggestions and incorporated them into VF-10's training regimen, helping turn the unit into one of the Pacific Fleet's most assertive fighter groups. By September, the Grim Reapers were prepared for frontline duty. The strategic environment had shifted dramatically. The U.S. victory at Midway had eliminated 4 of Japan's premier fleet carriers and inflicted severe losses on its most experienced air crews. In August, American forces seized Henderson Field on Guadalcanal, prompting Japan to assemble a large naval force to reclaim the island. Task Force 61 under Rear Admiral Thomas Kinkaid was ordered to stop the advance. Enterprise, Hornet, and the new battleship South Dakota formed the core of the defense. VF-10 embarked aboard Enterprise in early October, with Vejtasa now serving as a full lieutenant and squadron operations officer. On October 25th, a PBY patrol aircraft sighted the Japanese carrier force about 360 miles northwest of the Santa Cruz Islands, 4 carriers and a large screening force. The next morning would bring a major carrier engagement. Events nearly unraveled before the battle began. On the afternoon of October 25th, another Catalina reported the enemy at long range. Kinkaid considered launching a preemptive strike, even though American aircraft would be forced to recover after dark. He directed Hornet to send her attack group and initially kept Enterprise in a defensive role. Then he modified the plan and ordered Enterprise to launch a search group of SBDs, followed by nearly her entire air wing, including fighters. The search pattern assigned did not match the last known Japanese position, and the late launch time meant most aircraft would return near nightfall, a hazardous situation given radio silence and the difficulty of locating a moving carrier in darkness.
Vejtasa and many pilots considered the mission extremely risky, but the orders remained unchanged. VF-10 launched around mid-afternoon and flew a long, fruitless search over empty ocean. As sunset approached, most aircraft were low on fuel and began homing toward the projected recovery point. When they arrived, Enterprise was nowhere to be found. Throughout the day, Kinkaid had maneuvered the task force in response to submarine alerts, leaving the air group with outdated position estimates. Scattered across the darkening sea, many aircraft faced fuel exhaustion. Crews ditched or circled until their engines quit, hoping nearby destroyers would locate them. In the fading light, Vejtasa remembered that Enterprise had been leaving a visible oil trail during the morning patrol, a detail that would soon matter as the search for the carrier became increasingly desperate. The task force's survival the night before the battle hinged on a detail Vejtasa recalled from earlier in the day. Enterprise had been trailing a thin sheen of oil. As night fell and fuel gauges sank toward empty, he dropped to low altitude and searched the surface. The slick eventually appeared in the fading light. Following it, he located the carrier and guided other scattered aircraft to safety. Recovery operations continued into the night under extremely hazardous conditions. Some pilots crashed on approach, others ditched nearby when their tanks ran dry. By midnight, the air group was back aboard, but the episode had nearly cost Enterprise most of her aircraft before the battle even began. The Japanese struck at dawn. Shortly after 7:30 a.m. on October 26th, both fleets launched scouts. Within minutes, each side located the other and began full-scale strike operations. As a result, American aircraft were en route to the Japanese carriers at the same time Japanese attack groups were closing on Hornet and Enterprise. Defense rested on combat air patrols and anti-aircraft fire. VF-10 had 8 Wildcats airborne, including Vejtasa. At 8:22 a.m., radar detected a large Japanese formation. The initial blow fell on Hornet. Dive bombers and torpedo aircraft from Shokaku and Zuikaku broke through the American screen and began their attack runs at 8:50 a.m. Fighter direction was confused, radio traffic was overloaded, and the Wildcats were scattered. Each pilot engaged independently.
Vejtasa climbed toward 2 incoming dive bombers, beginning their descent. He caught the first at mid-altitude and shot it down before it released its weapon. The second escaped his immediate reach and continued its dive. A bomb struck Hornet moments later, followed by additional hits and a crash from a burning attacker that ignited fuel across the signal bridge. Torpedoes then slammed into the carrier's starboard side, leaving Hornet dead in the water and engulfed in fires by 9:15 a.m. The next wave targeted Enterprise. At 9:30 a.m., radar plotted a large Japanese torpedo group approaching low over the sea. A coordinated attack aimed at overwhelming the carrier's ability to maneuver. Enterprise was the only operational fleet carrier remaining in the Pacific, and her loss would imperil the Guadalcanal campaign. Vejtasa dived to intercept. Selecting a group of Kates approaching from the port side, he attacked from above, using speed from altitude to close the distance. His opening burst destroyed a torpedo plane immediately and shattered the formation. Several Japanese crews released their torpedoes prematurely, rendering them ineffective. Vejtasa pressed the attack, downing 2 more Kates, then 2 additional aircraft as the group broke apart. 5 torpedo bombers fell in approximately 4 minutes. Combined with his earlier dive bomber kills, he had 7 confirmed victories during the engagement, the highest single mission total recorded by an American naval aviator up to that time.
Lieutenant Edward O'Hare had received the Medal of Honor for downing 5 bombers earlier in the war. Vejtasa's achievement at Santa Cruz, 7 aircraft in 1 mission, surpassed that record, and his squadron commander, James Flatley, submitted a nomination for the same award. The recommendation moved up the chain of command until it reached Rear Admiral Thomas Kincaid, who now faced the consequences of the battle. Santa Cruz had left the U.S. carrier force on the edge of collapse. Hornet was lost, Enterprise was badly damaged, and the Pacific Fleet was effectively reduced to a single operational carrier. Kincaid's decisions before and during the battle, especially the ill-timed search flight that had nearly cost Enterprise her entire air group, were already drawing scrutiny. A high-profile Medal of Honor nomination risked renewed questions about why Enterprise had been so vulnerable and why so few fighters had been available to defend the task force. Kincaid downgraded the recommendation. Instead of the Medal of Honor, Vejtasa received a 3rd Navy Cross. The citation recognized his 7 aerial victories, but made no reference to the original nomination. Among VF-10's pilots, the decision was met with disbelief. Airmen who had flown with Vejtasa regarded the action at Santa Cruz and his earlier performance at Coral Sea as worthy of the nation's highest award. Vejtasa himself offered no public comment. He accepted the Navy Cross in return to duty. Strategic consequences became clearer in the weeks that followed. Japan emerged from Santa Cruz with a tactical victory, but at an enormous cost. Nearly 100 aircraft and large numbers of experienced aviators. These losses, combined with those suffered at Midway, severely weakened Japan's ability to conduct major offensive carrier operations. While Hornet had been destroyed, Enterprise returned to service within weeks after emergency repairs at Noumea and served as the sole U.S. carrier at Guadalcanal through the critical late 1942 engagements. By early 1943, Japanese naval aviation was in steep decline. Shokaku and Zuikaku retained their hulls, but not their trained air groups, and Japan lacked the capacity to replace lost veterans. As U.S. forces advanced up the Solomon Islands chain in 1943, Japanese carrier power was no longer decisive. Vejtasa's combat tour ended in early 1943. He was reassigned to stateside training duty, passing on the operational experience and tactics he had developed through 2 major carrier battles. His final wartime record stood at 10¼ confirmed victories, 3 at Coral Sea, 7 at Santa Cruz, and a shared kill, placing him well within the ranks of the Navy's leading aces. He did not fly combat again. The remainder of his career unfolded across the post-war decades. Vejtasa commanded fighter units, served as air officer aboard USS Essex during the Korean War, and completed studies at the Naval War College. In 1962, now a captain, he assumed command of the supercarrier USS Constellation, a powerful 1,000-foot vessel carrying an air wing larger than the entire force he had fought with in 1942. He led the ship for a year, emphasizing the training and readiness standards shaped by his early combat experiences. He retired from the Navy in July 1970 after 32 years of service, with 3 Navy Crosses and numerous additional awards, but not the Medal of Honor. Interest in his wartime record persisted after his retirement. He was inducted into the Carrier Aviation Hall of Fame in 1987, and journalists frequently asked about Santa Cruz and the downgraded recommendation. Vejtasa avoided speculation, speaking instead about the aviators who had not survived and about the commanders who had shaped his career. James Flatley, the man who had submitted the Medal of Honor nomination, had died in 1958 without knowing what became of it.
In 2012, author Ted Edwards began researching Vejtasa's life and located documentation confirming Flatley's Medal of Honor submission and Kincaid's downgrade. Edwards' biography, 7 at Santa Cruz, detailed the full story. Vejtasa died on January 23, 2013, at age 98. As he wished, his ashes were scattered at sea. The unresolved question remains whether he should have received the Medal of Honor. Congress retains the authority to waive the time limits on such awards, and several World War II cases have been reconsidered in the past. Vejtasa never pursued it. He never petitioned for review or questioned the decision publicly. His record, 3 fighters downed in a dive bomber at Coral Sea, 7 aircraft destroyed in one mission at Santa Cruz, and the defense of the Pacific Fleet's last operational carrier, stands without further commentary. His career underscores a central truth of naval aviation in 1942. Extraordinary skill, discipline, and resolve could offset deficiencies in equipment. The SBD that Vejtasa flew at Coral Sea was designed for steep angle bombing, not air combat. Yet, under his hands, it became a weapon capable of defeating elite Japanese fighters. The record he left behind remains among the most remarkable individual performances in carrier warfare.
If you'd like to support the work we do here, consider subscribing and enabling notifications. Before we end, we'd like to hear from you. Tell us where you're watching from. Viewers follow this channel from across the world, and each location adds to the record we preserve together. Share your city or state in the comments, and mention if anyone in your family served during the war. Thank you for watching.